All right, welcome in everyone to the deep dive. We're going to be diving into something today I think a lot of people can connect with, and it's actually Teachers' Day in India. We're going to be looking at, we're going to be starting specifically with a snapshot from Bangalore on September 5th, 2003. And our goal is to, really understand what this day means to people and explore some of the kind of interesting angles around how it's celebrated.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that we're doing this through a firsthand account, and we're
Mhm.
getting someone's perspective on how this day, Teacher's Day,
Absolutely.
is experienced but also potentially overlooked. And
Yeah.
it's a chance to go deeper than just the typical celebrations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we all see, on social media or whatever, the Happy Teacher's Day messages, but this is going to be kind of a different look at that. So, to kind of set the scene, this personal account, starts with a tradition that the author had with their students in Bangalore. And it's actually really heartwarming. Basically, every year on Teacher's Day, the students would all pool their money together.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and they would treat their teacher to lunch and a movie. And it just kind of paints this picture of real affection and a strong bond between student and teacher.
It definitely does.
Yeah.
I mean, that kind of tradition really speaks volumes about the impact that, a teacher can have and the respect that it fosters.
Yeah.
So it really does establish kind of positive image of what Teacher's Day can represent.
But here's where it gets really interesting. The following year, this author wasn't in Bangalore for Teacher's Day. So they're, kind of missing that tradition a little bit. And a friend suggests, hey, let's go to a movie to kind of, cheer you up. And so they head to the cinema. And as they get there, there's this like huge line of school and college students.
How interesting.
Yeah. So the author, kind of intrigued by this, strikes up a conversation with a group of girls.
So this is where we see, kind of that contrasting perspective come in.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, the author is like, well, why aren't you guys at school or college, marking Teacher's Day? And their response is really, it's telling. One girl basically says, like, why should there be a celebration? And like, why should there be a celebration? And when the author mentions, well, it's Teacher's Day, the reply was basically just kind of like, so what? Like, we knew it was a holiday. We're happy for the 2 days off. They didn't even think about why it was a holiday.
That's fascinating because it really raises that question, are these national and commemorative days becoming like just calendar events for certain people, and just focusing on the day off as opposed to the significance behind them?
Exactly. And it gets even more interesting. So the author kind of, maybe tapping into their teacher instincts a little bit, starts asking them about other important dates, November 14th, October 2nd, August 15th, January 26th. And their understanding was just like really limited. I mean, they knew they were holidays. They didn't really know why.
Right. So this isn't just Teacher's Day, right? It seems like there's a broader challenge with people really connecting to those big events in India's history
Yeah.
and the people behind those events.
Yeah. There was this one moment though where one student kind of quietly mentions that October 2nd was Gandhi's birthday. And the reason she knew that is actually quite sweet. It was her own birthday, and her grandfather, who was a freedom fighter, had named her Mohini after, Mohandas Gandhi.
Oh, wow. So that personal connection really shows how like knowledge becomes so much more meaningful
Yeah.
when it's connected to a person's own experience.
Absolutely. And even that has an interesting kind of twist to it. Mohini confided that she actually wasn't fond of her name. She felt it was kind of old-fashioned, and she had changed it to Monica.
Wow. So even though she had this direct link to Gandhi through her name and her grandfather,
Mm.
her preference was for something that she felt was more contemporary. So it's an interesting look at, how society and values are changing maybe.
Yeah, and then you get to kind of Independence Day and Republic Day, and one of the girls knew that one was Independence Day, August 15th, but the other one, January 26th, was just something connected with independence.
Right. Right.
And so when the author kind of pushed a little further, like, well, when did India actually gain independence? That's when you started to get a little bit of debate going on.
A little bit more
A
confusion.
little bit of confusion. You had one student saying 1950, you had another student saying 1942, which is interesting because that's based on a movie that they saw.
Oh, wow. Interesting.
Getting
Yeah.
1942, a love story.
That really shows how, popular culture, even when it's not totally accurate, can really shape people's understanding of history,
Oh,
right?
absolutely. And then, finally another student chimed in with the correct date, 1947.
It goes to show that we really need better history education. Oh, yeah, big time. But it's just interesting how, information can be presented to us in such an engaging way, like a film, but we don't always absorb it or understand it within, the correct historical context.
Yeah, it really highlights the need for educators to kind of give that framework for critical thinking, how to sort of sift through the information.
Absolutely. And so the author, kind of moving on from that was like, okay, well, let's see, just how aware you guys are of some national figures.
Hmm.
So they asked, well, who was the president of India before Abdul Kalam? And there's this like dead silence. They had no idea.
It's not necessarily that we have to criticize these students, right?
Yeah.
But it does show that there's maybe not a focus on the history of the country's leadership
Yeah.
and those people who have helped shape where India is today. Yeah. And so the author then decides, okay, well, let's talk about the reason for Teachers' Day.
Hmm.
And they introduce the students to Dr. Sarvapalli Radhakrishnan. And we learn about this incredible individual. He was, a really renowned philosopher and teacher and taught at Calcutta, Mysore, Benares, all these prestigious institutions.
Yeah. And one story that's pretty remarkable is about his time in Mysore. When he was leaving, his students had such respect for him that they decided to pull his carriage to the station themselves instead of using horses.
Yeah.
Like that is a real testament to, how much they valued him as a teacher.
Oh, yeah. And it wasn't just his own students. The account actually talks about how students from other colleges would come to his lectures regardless of their field of study, simply because he was recognized as this like exceptional teacher.
Yeah, absolutely. And, he did more than just teach. He ended up being the president of India.
Mm.
And it's because of all of that, because of his work in education, that his birthday, September 5th, became Teachers' Day.
Mm.
They wanted to honor his life and all his dedication to education.
It's funny because when the author mentioned Radhakrishnan, one of the students immediately thought of those like beautiful marble statues of Radhakrishna that you see, at like a Rama Hare Krishna temple. So it's
Right.
an interesting, if slightly off-target connection, but it shows, it's an example of how young people can kind of make connections in their minds between things that might seem unrelated.
I mean, it just shows that people come with so many different cultural references. And as educators, we have to make sure that we're giving people the right context and making those connections clear.
Oh, absolutely. And the author kind of concludes this whole encounter with a really it's a thoughtful reflection on the purpose of holidays like Teachers' Day, right? And they express this concern that, we've kind of fallen into this routine of just like, declaring holidays and giving, what they call like boring speeches.
Right.
And instead, they argue that we should be like actively, meaningfully engaging with these days, right? Like doing things like, tree planting to raise awareness about the environment, or, even having picnics to build stronger bonds between, teachers and students outside of the classroom.
That is a good question. Are we actually using these days to their fullest potential?
Right.
Yeah.
And the author really emphasizes that. Like teachers themselves need to kind of walk the walk, set an example and make Teachers' Day and these other occasions something that kids look forward to and that they find like truly meaningful.
So it sounds like the author is advocating for a more active and thoughtful way to mark these days. We have to make sure we're educating and inspiring people. We can't just have a holiday on the calendar
Yeah.
and assume that everybody understands its purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, as we're kind of wrapping up here, this deep dive has really shown us these two very different sides of, the same event. We have, on the one hand, this really personal, cherished tradition that shows genuine student appreciation. And on the other hand, you have a group of students who, don't really know why they have the day off. And they have a pretty shaky grasp of even some basic national, dates and figures. So it highlights how important it is to understand the why behind these holidays.
Yeah, and it brings to this question about the role of schools and educators, right?
Mm.
Like, how can we go beyond just marking these days on a calendar and make sure people really appreciate what they stand for?
Right. So, as a final thought to leave you with, think about, what role do you think schools and teachers have in making these days, these commemorative days, truly educational and engaging? How do we go from just, rote celebrations to a real understanding and appreciation of their history? It's definitely something to think about. So, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks, everyone.